way to get started, I know we got folks from all over the city here tonight, so maybe a good way to do some quick intros in the chat. Just let us know what neighborhood from the city that you're coming from. All right. Well, I will go ahead and kind of get us kicked off this evening. First off, just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us this evening and talk a bit about the zoning ordinances that are currently working their way through NPUs throughout the city that were introduced by Councilmember Faroki a couple of months ago. Well, I guess a month and a half ago now. I've got a presentation that we'll walk through and talk a bit about the ordinances, situate them, and then about what they do, what they don't do, kind of at a high level and a technical level. And then big thing that we want to provide tonight is an opportunity for you folks, for everyone to ask questions and to get your feedback on what you like, don't like, concerned about, and otherwise. As we're kind of the process that we're in as a city is really getting feedback. The NPUs are currently reviewing the ordinances, but they're don't go for a vote until the month of October. And so we did presentations this whole month, and we'll be back again in the month of September to NPUs around the city and other neighborhood organizations and the like. And so this phase is really important for the work that we do to get questions. There's a question about the CDP. This is not a meeting about the comprehensive development plan, just to be clear. This is a meeting about the zoning ordinances that were introduced by Councilmember Faroki that do a variety of things that we'll talk about later tonight. But this would not count as a public comment for the CDP to the question in the chat. So we'll go through that and answer questions like this throughout the evening. And we also, Commissioner Keene is going to join us here in a minute and give some words on this. And so just before we kind of completely get started, I'll do some quick introductions. My name is Josh Humphreys. I work in the Department of City Planning in the Office of Housing and Community Development. And there are others on the call from the department, including Paula Owens, who is helping manage the DCP communications tonight. If you have any questions about or having issues with Zoom or otherwise, feel free to shoot her a direct message and she can help. And then Leah LaRue is also on. Leah helps manage and support our NPUs throughout the city. And then Sonia Sequeira, who manages a lot of the community engagement work that we do, is on tonight as well. And then as well as a few others from the department. So got some folks here that are happy to help answer your questions. That is correct. KRUS on the CDP comments by Friday. That's the next deadline for the CDP. So I will, I'll go ahead and jump in and do a quick presentation just on the ordinances and a little bit of backstory, and then we'll go from there. All right, so the Commissioner Tim Keene actually just joined us. So before I jump into this, I will give him a chance to say hello to everyone and talk a little bit about the work that we're doing. Hey, Tim, can you hear us? Looks like you're. Hey, Tim. So we were just getting started and was going to go through the presentation, but I wanted to give you a chance to just say hello to everyone before we get started.
It's having technical difficulties of my own making, no doubt, my own shortcomings when it comes to technology. Thank you, Josh. Just quickly, I do want to thank Josh Humphreys and everybody in housing and community development and people all over the Department of City Planning that have a hand in the effort that's underway right now, the facilitation of this important community conversation about housing. And all I'll say is that, you know, this is a conversation that Atlanta must be having. A city that's in as much demand as Atlanta and as dynamic as Atlanta is. The work around maintaining affordability of the city is hard work. I mean, it requires lots of conversations that at times are difficult and people have different opinions, but we must have them. I mean, there's just no way to deal with housing affordability in the city by just finding enough public subsidy or inclusionary zoning. Those two things alone just, they're not enough. I mean, you know, for any city that's growing like Atlanta is, you have to get to the base of things, and the base of things has to do with zoning. And we're not proposing things that are outrageous for Atlanta. We're in keeping with Atlanta city design. We're thinking through what are ways that we can address housing through zoning, but in ways that are commensurate with the physical characteristics of our city. And in the parlance of Atlanta city design, the conservation areas of Atlanta, as well as the growth areas. Turns out IZ, for instance, is substantially a growth area zoning tool. And the affordable housing that the city's achieving and denser apartment buildings and so forth, that's very important. But it's just not enough. You know, it just isn't. And Josh will probably go through a presentation to kind of delve into this, but now is a very important time for Atlanta, and change is difficult. There's no question about it. But if we don't find ways to use growth as a vehicle for a better city right now, then, you know, we will have lost our opportunity. So this is a important discussion and one that we greatly appreciate all of you participating in tonight, but also through all the public meetings that are happening right now across the city in NPUs and otherwise. We will get back to city council eventually with a version of these ordinances, but the conversations that are going on in the discussion is leading to good ideas as to how to make them better. So again, thank you for participating, and Josh, I'll turn it back over to you to keep it going.
Thanks so much, Tim. Sorry about that, y'all. I got muted on accident. Appreciate it, Tim. One thing before I jump in and give a presentation about the ordinances, I'll just kind of make a quick note on timing and where all of this is. So the three ordinances that we'll talk about tonight, one is a text amendment paper to the zoning code, and then the other two are related to what's called a proactive rezoning, and that has to do with the small apartments ordinance near transit. And those three were all introduced in early July by Councilmember Faruqi. And as zoning ordinances, the next trigger is to go to the neighborhood planning unit or NPUs. And so normally a zoning ordinance will go for 1 or 2 months. We, after some initial feedback and really agree with everyone that we're given an additional month that it'll be at the NPUs. So this month and next month, we're going to NPUs to give presentations, to get feedback. But it won't be until the month of October that NPUs will vote on these with recommendations on these ordinances. And after that, it would go to the Zoning Review Board or ZRB, and then back to City Council for a final vote. So right now, this is feedback period and really getting kind of your response. And I'll note a few things already in the ordinances that that we're looking at changing based on the early feedback that we've received. So with that, I will jump right in. And if you have any other questions, feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll get to them after the presentation. So Atlanta City Design Housing, just briefly, was a project that was released toward the end of 2020. And a lot of the proposals in here, really a lot of the framing and history and current state of things and where we want to go are built on this project. And there's a lot more research and kind of background behind the work that's done. And so if you're interested in this and want to know more really about where some of these ideas are coming from, I encourage you to take a look at our Atlanta City Design Housing work. And you'll be able to, you can find that. I'll give a link out later in the presentation, but where you can find out more about that and the ordinances themselves. To situate this, and there was a question early on about the CDP and where this all fits into the work that we as a department and as the City of Atlanta are doing. The Atlanta City Design is a plan that was released and adopted into the city's charter several years ago in 2017. And it's a guiding document about really the next generation of the city and looks beyond just kind of the next 5 to 10 years, but the next life of the city, and asks who we want to be and how do we address the kind of existential questions like housing affordability that we have in the city. Coming out of Atlanta City Design, it's really the next phase is the implementation and how to put those ideas on the ground. And that work includes aligning the comprehensive development plan to Atlanta City Design. We're in the middle of an administrative update for the first time since the release of Atlanta City Design. And so there's work kind of getting those two things to talk to one another and letting Atlanta City Design influence that. It also impacts things like zoning and the work we were doing around housing affordability. And those projects mixed with public meetings and feedback and really just thinking about the questions of who do we want to be as a city and in technical in the weeds kind of ways is how we put Atlanta City Design on the ground and turn it into policies that help us make a better city as we aspire to be the beloved community. A little bit of policy timeline on the housing stuff, and specifically in 2017, as I just mentioned, Atlanta City Design was adopted into the city's charter. Not long after that, the department began several initiatives around implementing Atlanta City Design. And one of the core initiatives that we started as early as 2018 was something that became known as Atlanta City Design Housing, but really the question of housing in Atlanta, how do we create a healthy housing ecosystem for anyone that wants to call the city home, that's lived here for 20 years or moved here yesterday? How do we make a city that's inclusive and affordable across a lot of income levels? And so we started with initial public engagement in 2018 in summer session. Some of you that are on the call were here. I think I see Kate Little on the call. Kate and I realized the other day that we sat in my first day on the job at the City of Atlanta. Kate and I sat at one of these sessions together. At the time we were calling it the Equitable Housing Needs Assessment, but asking questions about the future of the city and housing affordability. And that led us to really a lot of questions about how do we better understand ourselves and better understand our needs as a city when it comes to housing affordability, and come up with unique solutions that respond to the unique needs that Atlanta has. Not long after that, the city, under the Bottoms administration, released the One Atlanta Housing Affordability Action Plan that included a lot of the ideas that are now in these proposals now around reduction of parking minimums to increase housing affordability and better use of accessory dwellings to expand housing options in the city. And that's really kind of the Atlanta City Design and the work of the Housing Affordability Action Plan came together in many ways in the Atlanta City Design Housing Project. And that was released toward the end of last year. And the first half of this year, leading up to the ordinances being introduced in July, there were, we had 50 plus engagement sessions with thousands of residents across the city, asking questions, getting feedback about the proposals in there and shaping them in ways that we really think improved them before they were introduced. So now we're in a space where those ordinances have been introduced, and a selection of policies from Atlanta City Design Housing are part of that. And so we're in kind of the next phase of refinement as we go through the MPUs and get feedback on the ordinances themselves. That's where we're at now with this. One other thing I'll just note, and I don't have time to really get into in today's presentation, but a lot of the work we did looks at the history of housing policy in Atlanta. In October of last year, we hosted a book club on the book, The Color of Law. And that book and a lot of the other research we did looks at the ways in which zoning in particular and land use policy and other housing policies have been used to segregate the city, often by race and class, in ways that make it harder for folks to live in mixed income communities, mixed race communities. And many of the segregated ways we see our city today are a result of direct governmental intentions over the last 100 or so years, maybe longer than that now. And we think that in addition to creating housing affordability, we have a moral imperative to address the ways in which our zoning code is still perpetuating classist and racist overtones. The city is also growing rapidly right now and growing in ways that are outpacing our housing supply. And this is putting a lot of pressure on the housing market. We think it's important, and this is Atlanta City Design lays a lot of this out, that we need to organize ourselves so that we can grow in a way that growth can be good for the city and not in ways that are detrimental to Atlanta. The current zoning code we have was designed really to exclude in kind of classist ways to make it harder to live in subtle density that allowed for affordability and a number of ways that we'll talk about a little bit later. And we need more housing at price points. I mean, that's part of what the zoning code has failed to do, is allow for a variety of housing types in neighborhoods throughout the city. And we think that allowing them there can take pressure off of multiple levels of the housing market so that we can use the subsidy that we do have for the households that need it most. The last zoning ordinance was updated in 1982. And I think it's one thing that's important to note about that is that 1982, which is right kind of here on the left-hand side of your map, was toward the end of a period of depopulation in the city. The city lost about 100,000 residents from a little over 100,000 residents between 1970 and 1990. And 82 is kind of smack dab in the middle of that period. And so the city was undergoing significant population decline the last time we updated our zoning code. But in the last decade, we've added 80,000 people and now have the highest population in the city's history, eclipsing the 1970 population total. And the existing zoning code was built in a period where supply and demand had a different kind of imbalance. The supply outpaced the demand in many ways because population was declining, but we had a city that was used to housing 100,000 more people. And so the low density design of our zoning code matched the period in some ways of the 80s and where the city was at the time, but it does not match our current situation and the current growth that we're seeing in the city. And there's a need to look critically at the ways in which we can be nimble and adaptable as the city evolves, as the city grows, so that our zoning code can make room for that growth in ways that are equitable and inclusive and affordable. To give an example of the ways in which we're seeing growth right now, there is new housing coming online, but the majority of this new housing is above $1,500 a month, above $2,000 a month. The yellow that you can see here is the 2019 rental units by cost, and the magenta color is the 2010. And so we're not growing the right or very big diversity of units. We're growing high income units, and we're losing a lot of our lower income units. And part of the reason we think this is the case is because we're not creating enough of the right types of units in the market anymore. This is a graph showing number of housing units by structure from 2010 to 2019. The top there that you see is the single family housing. And then the three at the bottom are your smaller apartments, your duplexes and quads, and your 12 unit buildings and your 20 to 49s. So these have been stagnant, in some ways have declined over the last decade, even as the city has grown in population. The real uptick we see is this 50 plus unit structure. It's this blue line here. And this, if we go back to the previous slide where we see this bump in the higher cost housing, I think there's a direct correlation between the two of those. And that's because we're creating most of our new units in these large multifamily housing that are costly to build. And really the only time we see affordable housing in these newer large buildings is when there's subsidized affordable housing or in something like inclusionary zoning. And they're an important part of our housing ecosystem, but they can't be the only thing that we build. And right now, that and single family housing is about the only two things that we build. And that's in large part because our zoning code won't allow these small apartment types that have long been the backbone of affordable housing in cities. So as you think about the subtle changes that we can implement that'll add subtle density, we want to think about solutions that are specific to Atlanta's needs and unique development patterns. So Tim mentioned when he spoke about looking at growth areas and conservation areas, and how do we look to add new housing supply throughout the city in ways that honor the character of the neighborhoods and allow the growth to be subtle, but also allow there to be housing at various price points in the neighborhood. So to take a scenario of a house and a basement apartment, the basement apartment is going to be cheaper due to the fact that it is a basement apartment compared to the single family house that it's in. And we think that re-allowing in many neighborhoods that historically allowed them but no longer do, this type of housing will be integral toward us allowing mixed income neighborhoods and just introducing a housing typology that is important to our market. I also want to make sure that this is opt-in market-based model, that this is not something that you're forced to do, that no one's going to show up at your house with an accessory dwelling unit and force you to put it in your backyard, but something you have the option to do, and to give you the flexibility as a homeowner, or to give residents across the city the flexibility to create housing in ways that work best for them, to use their properties in ways that work best for them, whether it's for a family member or to create a little bit of extra revenue for themselves, that having the flexibility to allow extra housing options is important. And then look at ways that kind of tied to that is wealth creation opportunities for homeowners. Giving homeowners these options oftentimes allows them to create wealth and revenue and use their property in ways that are beneficial to them, while also creating much needed housing for the city. And then, as I mentioned, to create middle income housing through the market really allows us to use the subsidy through things like the housing bond and other types of tax subsidy schools like options and the like. It frees that money up to be for lower AMI, for lower income residents that need it the most, that are always going to need some type of subsidy. But right now, because of the housing market that we have, we're using that subsidy as well for middle income households because we're not creating enough housing for them without subsidy. To put this into a little bit of perspective and the other work that's happening right now, and I just would note that we understand that zoning is not a silver bullet when it comes to housing affordability and creating a healthy housing market. We think it's a critical part of it, and it helps to alleviate a lot of pressure in the market, but it's not the only thing. And in addition to the work we're doing around zoning, Earlier this year, the city passed a $100 million housing bond and two $50 million tranches. That one will come a little bit later, that will support affordable housing work, both small and medium and large scale affordable housing work throughout the city. We have tools like inclusionary zoning that's around the Beltline, stadium neighborhoods, and the new West Side Quarry Park that requires affordability and new development that happens. And then we also have other tax tools like the lease purchase bond, and we're in the middle of updating the urban enterprise zone program, and use things like tax allocation districts to help subsidize and fund affordable housing at various levels throughout the city. And then we are in the middle of our work on developing affordable housing on public land. The photo here on the right, or the overhead, is an image of a parcel downtown Atlanta that in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, maybe a little bit longer, but the next month for sure, that an RFP is going to go out for that site to develop that site for long-term affordable housing right in the heart of the city, near MARTA and jobs and other core amenities. And we're looking at doing this type of work all throughout the city where there's publicly owned vacant land, putting it to active use and using it for affordable housing. And the last thing I'll mention is that we are in the process of building out what we're calling a housing innovation lab that'll work with homeowners who want to build ADUs and how to design them and get them permitted and get that through the system, but we'll also, help with the work around public land for affordable housing and work with developers in ways to find more affordability in their projects as well. So a quick overview of the ordinances, the three ordinances that are currently under consideration at MPUs and how they all fit together. So there are three kind of main sections of the work that are in these. The first one is around affordable housing near transit, and this is the one that touches all three of the ordinances. The MPUs that are mentioned here are the pertinent MPUs that are impacted by it. And this ordinance, what it does is this portion, we made some changes to a zoning district called MRMU that I'll get into in a second. And then alongside that change, are proposing what's called a proactive rezoning to R4 and R4A and R5 parcels that are within 1.5 mile walking distance of MARTA stations to the small apartment category, so that these areas near MARTA stations can have the ability, not required to, but the ability to add more housing in exchange for affordability on their properties. The second portion of this is around parking minimum requirements for residential parking. In the zoning code currently, parking is required for residential uses in many of zoning districts. And so this would remove that from the majority of zoning districts. And this is just in one of the ordinances. And then the last thing I mentioned is creating more flexibility for accessory dwelling units. And this is just in the one text amendment ordinance that's listed here, the 04561 one. And this would impact R4, R4A, R4B, and R5 zoning districts, which are the R4, all the R4s make up a large chunk of the single family zoning district in the city, and R5 is the two family zoning district in the city. So the first one we'll talk through is the affordable apartments near transit with a density bonus. So this is a picture of kind of a classic affordable or kind of small apartment building in the city. You may know these in your neighborhood. They're all throughout the city. And over the course of, really the kind of toward the end of the first half of the 20th century, zoning started making it harder and harder to build these in many areas. And by the time we get to the end of the 20th century, it was nearly impossible to build these. And this is kind of part of the story. And there's more backstory to get into, but for the sake of time, that the harder we made it to build these, the more large apartments and single family that we started seeing in the city. And so we pinched out from both sides this type of housing. One thing that's important to note about this is that they've long, this type of housing tends to produce some more affordable units. And say, instead of let's say a duplex or single family house that would be on the same property, by having smaller units just by the type of housing that it is, and by splitting up the cost of the land among the multiple units that are there, whether it's rental or for sale, it tends to be more affordable as an option. And we also think that aligning this housing near MARTA stations makes the most sense as we think about in the city, as we grow as a city, that using the heavy rail that we have and building around that heavy rail, which is a core tenet of Atlanta city design, that this would allow us to do so. And it also reduce it would reduce pressure on the streets from car infrastructure standpoint, but also reduce the transportation costs for those that choose to live there without a car. So this portion of the ordinance, what would it do? So the text amendment portion would make changes to a zoning district called MRMU. The first thing that we do is downzone that zoning district from the existing 4 to 12 unit allowance down to 1 to 4 units, and then give an optional density bonus if affordability is provided. The first option would be you could go from 1 to 4 units up to 5 to 8 units if one of those units is rented out at 60% AMI or sold at 80% AMI for the next 20 years. Or you could go to 9 to 12 units if 2 of those are rented out of the same AMIs. The other thing that I'll mention that we're working on is compatibility requirements and controls. Some of the early feedback we got was that there was a real desire to ensure that in the areas that this is proposed, that they fit with the neighborhood character. And some of these areas, or several of these areas, historically allowed small apartment buildings, and some of them did not. But in either case, that whether it's looking at things like the front yard setbacks to ensure that we can limit, that it fits into the neighborhood character. And so that's something we agree with and are working on some proposed changes to that we'll hopefully be able to share soon. That would address that. We're also looking at things like, well, sorry, never mind. Sorry, I lost my train of thought on that. So the other element that I'll mention is the proactive rezoning piece. So this changes the way the district itself works. The proactive rezoning, and here's a picture of the first set of parcels here on the right, and this is a half-mile walking distance from MARTA stations. If your parcel was R4, R4A, R5 zoned, and was it within 1/2 mile of MARTA station, walking distance, it intersected with that. One thing I will mention, we got some feedback and some conversations with different neighborhoods. There were some blocks that they thought should have been included and that weren't. So we think we got that cleaned up, and we'll be sharing a new map with everyone soon. But just want to point that out. So that's all for the MRMU portion of it. The second one has to do with parking minimums. So as we think about parking and parking requirements, first goal really is to unbundle parking costs from housing costs. In Atlanta, our residential parking includes a requirement in the zoning code for parking spaces, or residential housing, sorry. And these can add significant costs to new housing development. It can cost $20,000, $30,000 per parking spot in a structured garage to build that. And you run that out over the course of 15, 20 years, you're talking about well over $100 a month that gets relayed to the renter or owner for the cost of parking construction, whether or not that person owns a car or not. And we think that eliminating them, and where other cities that have done this, will reduce the cost of housing construction and production. That will allow for more affordable rental housing in the city, and will allow, in some cases, more housing to be built on these areas as well, on these larger multifamily sites where so much of the space is dedicated to cars. By allowing for there to be less parking requirements, the more housing can be built where appropriate. And then I guess this is maybe the more philosophical element of it, but that we should get out of the business of regulating parking as the government, especially as we move as a city to be more multimodal, to give people more options other than car ownership, that requiring parking in our zoning code and tying it to housing is reinforcing car dependency patterns, and we want to move away from that and let the market guide the parking construction in the city. The ordinance itself would remove residential parking requirements from primary zoning districts in the city. This includes all 1 and 2 family districts. So R1 through R3 are excluded, but R4, R4A, R5, and others are included in that. All multifamily districts and all mixed use districts. If there's a residential component in those districts, the parking requirements are removed. But for non-residential parking requirements like retail or other types of commercial, if there's a parking requirement for that, that stays in place. Only the residential components are removed. We're also keeping all requirements in SPIs and other special districts. For SPIs, oftentimes parking has been a long conversation about kind of the nuanced needs of a particular neighborhood or area, and we want to continue having those conversations. Many of the SPIs that we work with either don't have parking requirements or even have parking maximums in place already. And so we'll continue having those conversations at the individual SPI level. But this one's targeted at the major zoning districts. And then where there are parking maximums, those are, we're proposing they stay in place. So the third element is around accessory dwelling units, how to make them more flexible and affordable. First thing I'll note, just for to make sure we're kind of all on the kind of the same page and using the same terms with this, is that accessory dwellings talk about the kind of the accessory use on a property. So you have a primary structure, primary dwelling, and then the secondary dwelling or accessory dwelling refers to the dwelling. And there are two types of accessory dwellings that exist in many U.S. cities: attached accessory dwellings and detached accessory dwellings. In 2018, in large parts of the city of Atlanta allowed detached accessory dwellings. That's like the picture that's on the left here, and did not allow at the time attached accessory dwellings. And there are other proposed changes for accessory dwellings I'll get into, but the major one is that we're proposing to allow attached accessory dwellings. And this is something that's common to Atlanta, and historically was a core part of our development pattern in the city. This map here on the right, and these numbers are just the single family. So this does not include R5. This is just R4 and below. But there are currently over 2,400 existing two-family structures, and many of them are like the basement apartment on the previous slide. And these are in areas that now no longer allow them. And we think that looking at ways to allow these types of dwellings really fits the neighborhood character and would allow us to add more affordability, more settled density in ways that fit the majority of the neighborhoods in the city that we're proposing them. And here's the list of the neighborhoods with the most of these that in existence right now in Atlanta. The other thing that we've learned looking at attached ADUs versus detached ADUs, we spent some time talking with folks in Los Angeles and a few other cities, and attached ADUs just tend to be quite a bit cheaper to build than detached ADUs. A detached ADU is a full house. It's a small house, but it's a full house that has to be built, and that costs a lot of money. And it's an important option to have, and some folks really want to build one, but the cost is prohibiting for a lot of folks. And places like Los Angeles that have been doing this a little bit longer have found that really it's conversions and additions that make up the lion's share of the ADUs that they see built in their city. And a lot of that has to do with cost. But right now we are only allowing the backyard home option, which is the smallest proportion for them. The other thing that I'll note that was interesting in our conversations with Los Angeles is that the majority of the folks building ADUs in the city are owner builders. So they're regular everyday homeowners, more so than investors, developers, contractors. And I think this is an important point that we're very serious that this tool can be a tool that's approachable and accessible for homeowners to build wealth, to give options and create opportunities for this type of wealth creation. And so it's encouraging to see that in other cities this has turned out, and we've seen similar patterns. We have a lot less ADUs built in Atlanta, but have seen similar patterns early on that this is a tool really for homeowners to add flexibility and an opportunity to benefit from it. So benefits of ADUs in Atlanta. One, they provide moderate income housing options all throughout the city, and allowing them attached would make them more affordable to construct in many situations. Creating a variety of price points in single-family areas would open up neighborhoods to residents who otherwise may not be able to afford it, while at the same time allowing homeowners to financially benefit from population growth. And the flexibility to provide housing for family members is something that's only growing. Last year, some data came out that showed that 2020 ended up being the year with the highest 18 to 29-year-olds living with their parents in the last 100 years. And I think that's an example of ways in which household dynamics change, family needs change, and allowing flexibility for things like accessory dwellings to allow your home to accommodate the changing needs of your family is an important thing. So this portion of the ordinance, what would it do? One, it would allow attached ADUs And the ADU would be size restricted at 50% of the size of the main dwelling or 1,000 square feet, whichever is greater. The second thing that we're proposing would be to allow what's called zero lot line for sale ADUs. This is a mechanism that we currently use in the city's R5 zoning category for duplexes. So R5 allows for duplexes, and so zero lot line allows both sides of a duplex to be sold separately, while the original lot controls of the lot stay in place. So the setbacks and lot coverage requirements and the like govern both of them combined. It does not create like a formal second lot, but only for the sake of ownership purposes. In many ways, it's somewhat similar to condoing as far as it being something that impacts ownership, but does not impact the development controls of the lot. And so we're proposing to allow that for accessory dwellings. And this would be something that we think that could help homeowners collateralize their ADU and be able to get more traditional construction financing to build ADUs. Whether they wanted to keep it or eventually sell it. And then in situations where a homeowner would like to sell their ADU, it would introduce new, more affordable ownership opportunities in the market that is often hard to come by. In the R4s, only one ADU would be allowed, which is the case for R4 and R4A now. We are adding R4B as a zoning district that would allow ADUs. That's the only zoning district that we're expanding ADU allowance to. And then in R5, currently R5, like the R4s, allows a maximum of 2 units. R5 also allows duplexes. And so we're proposing to change that allowance up to 3 total units that would allow a duplex plus an ADU. Or if someone would prefer a single family plus 2 ADUs in that zoning district. And then we're proposing to increase the detached ADU height from 20 feet to 24 feet. This would allow kind of a more traditional second floor or a unit over a garage, which is a common request and desire that to create that pattern. But at 20 feet, it's very difficult to do right now. And then the last proposal related to ADUs is to adjust the rear and side yard setbacks for the R4, R4A, and R4B districts to 4 feet when building an ADU. So in R5, when we originally allowed ADUs, we put a provision in there that said the setbacks when building an ADU are 4 feet on both side and rear, but otherwise they would remain the same. And so we're proposing to take that language and add it to the R4 districts as well. So the last thing I'll mention, and we can drop this link in the chat, is that we have there's a story map that we did originally that talks a lot about the history of it that you can find a link to. But the main thing I'll point everyone to right now is our citydesign.com site. And that site, if you follow the link, will lead you to FAQs and questions and interactive maps about the proposals. And it's really an opportunity to dig in and better understand these ordinances. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and we can take some questions. It looks like there's been quite a few questions that are in the chat here, but if you have some questions you'd like to share out, please just raise your hand and we can go through there and we can go that way. If not, I can take some time just going through the chat and trying to answer those questions. Hi, Brenda.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. I am looking at the first part of the ordinance where you're looking at R4, R4A, R5 within a half a mile of the MARTA station. And each NPU received lots that will be affected by this. And it's my understanding that a homeowner would have to agree to sell their lot. So if I can't tell for sure if these lots are adjacent, but if you don't have enough square footage to build even a 4-unit, what would be the purpose of this ordinance? Seems like to me, say you have one homeowner that may want to sell, the other one doesn't. If the lots aren't adjacent, you don't have enough square footage. I just don't see the benefit of this. Can you help me with that?
Sure, I can try and take a stab at that. So, one thing I'll note with the way that the MRMU district, we worked on amending it, and some of the changes we're still working through, is to make it where it's dynamic, and that single family and two family housing can sit alongside some larger or small apartment buildings as well, so that single family detached houses are also appropriate in MRMU, and they're an allowed usage and would be something that would still be allowed, and I would even say are welcomed as part of the makeup of that district, that we expect and hope that there's a mix of one family and two family and four family type structures all next to one another in the MRMU area. The reason for the way that we did the rezoning, it really looks at the distance from the MARTA station and the zoning districts related to that. And as far as kind of lots and what lots make sense and don't make sense, I think that there are going to be different lots that make different kinds of sense for how many units are viable. There's a cap. You can never do more than 12 units on an MRMU structure, even with the affordability requirements. But we understand and think it's okay, and that there are going to be some lots where that's not even viable and doesn't make sense, and there are going to be some lots where it does make sense. As we look at kind of uniformity around zoning and looking at that work, that rather than just picking and choosing ones that we think make a lot of sense, we wanted to have like a really uniform methodology and say, okay, like if you're within this and this kind of zoning, this is what the proposal is. So that's why maybe a smaller lot that you're talking about was included, that maybe as it is now wouldn't make a ton of sense for MRMU.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to keep going through hands raised for now. So Joan.
Hi, Josh. How are you?
Hi.
So I do understand the benefits of increasing the density and maximizing lot space. I also can see the disadvantages of it. I just was wondering, is there any consideration in how you guys plan to regulate investors in neighborhoods like the West Side that are heavily investor owned from taking advantage of this and increasing, basically doubling the profit of their lots by producing a structure as a primary home and then adding an ADU to maximize the ROI on their investment, versus a person who's living in the home like you're proposing would be more common, and doing this as supplemental income. So how do you plan to regulate that? And then secondly, is the legislation proposing this to be a text amendment, or is it still up for like a SAP or SUP where it will come before the neighborhood MPUs?
Sure, I'll answer the second question first, just on process. So these are, well, there's a few ordinances. One is a text amendment. And so there may be some elements that would go for SAP or SUP in kind of specific criteria, but generally these are things that would be allowed by right under the text amendment. And then there is a proactive rezoning, which is the half mile near MARTA station that we're talking about, and that would be a rezone, but would be under the new kind of guiding version of MRMU if that passes. So that's the way that those two would intersect with one another. To the question on developers and just general speculation, I guess, we're aware of kind of the challenges that are happening in several parts of the city around speculation, and I think that we want to put as many safeguards in place that we can limit kind of the negative consequences of that in ways that can cause displacement, that can cause gentrification in the neighborhoods in the city. And so I think that there are lots of other programs that we're working on kind of related to that. And I think related to this particular ordinance and the work that we're doing around it, one thing is, we're seeing a lot of areas in the city where kind of modest single family homes or even duplexes that exist are being torn down and replaced with newer structures that are single family houses and sold for lots of money. And so one thing I would say about the MRMU ordinance is we're requiring affordability whether they rent it or sell it if they put more than 4 units on there, which is something that they don't have to do right now. So this would ensure that even if a single family house was torn down in the case of the situation, and 12 units were put back, that there's 2 affordable units, whether rental or for sale, that are put back in place there. And I think the other thing that I would mention is that the market rate units in these are going to likely be more affordable than the single family homes that are being speculated on right now, because they tend to be smaller units, they tend to be more subtle. And then I also think that it's, as we add more housing units in areas that are desirable areas of the city, it creates room for the people that are trying to move to the city, or move to the neighborhoods, and takes pressure off of other parts of the neighborhoods, which I think plays an important role in the macroeconomics of the city of just taking general pressure off the market. We're in a supply shortage, kind of a historic supply shortage in Atlanta right now that's causing drastic increases in housing costs and land costs in the city. And as we open up more housing opportunities in neighborhoods all throughout the city, it'll take a lot of that pressure off of that. And so I don't know, I think that mixed with, the other work we're trying to do, trying to give people opportunity to stay in their homes and stay in their neighborhoods is core to the work that we're doing in our office, and in addition to the zoning work. And so I'm sensitive to the question and the goals that or the things that you brought up. And so I'd love to chat more, maybe offline, if you've got if you want to talk through kind of programs or stuff, then maybe we could be helpful in the neighborhoods that you live or work in.
Thank you. I'd love to.
Okay. Yeah, just I'll put my email in here. If anyone, feel free to shoot me an email, if you will, Joan. We'll get some time set up. Okay, we'll go to the next question. Our hand raised is Carl.
Yes, thank you, Josh. Let me first thank you and your team for putting this together, and then taking time out of your evening for this public meeting. My question is about financing these subtle density for homeowners, because the traditional financing that, like a loan is, it's very difficult to get for these kind of things. And so is that something that the city is considering, like low interest loans or grants, something like that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll mention, are you talking mainly around ADUs?
Yeah,
Carl?
absolutely. Yeah.
So just for some context, accessory dwellings, one of the challenges we've run into has been financing over the last few years for it. And so there's a couple elements to it that we're working on. One, we are working with Invest Atlanta on a program that would be that would help, similar to something like what down payment assistance does for first-time home buyers, but would help with kind of upfront cash needs for those that want to build ADUs and don't have the cash on hand in order to do so, and others that can help kind of provide the other construction loans related to that. But upfront cash is a big limiter. So we're working on a program for that. I mentioned the Urban Enterprise Zone program in the presentation earlier, and it's used as a tax abatement tool. We're finalizing an update. We just got to the state, and now we're working through the local ordinances. That tool, one of the things that we're excited about with it is that we can use that tool for single family, 1 and 2 family type of structures. And we're creating a program right now in that we're excited about that would create a tax abatement for homeowners that do build an accessory dwelling. Now, that's not upfront cash, but having that incentive helps build, helps from kind of the financial feasibility side of it, but also helps support homeowners that are looking to build ADUs. And those, if you went through that type of tool, would require the tenant of the ADU would be an income qualified renter over the life of the abatement period. The last thing I'll mention is the attached ADUs, and then that portion of the ordinance itself. One of the reasons that we're proposing attached ADUs is because, and this is really learning from a lot of other cities that have done this, that they're just a lot cheaper to build, to convert a basement space or add an addition on the back of your home, or to convert an internal space in a house, just tends to be a lot cheaper than building a separate structure. And so, and also a little bit easier to finance traditionally as an improvement on the house versus an accessory dwelling that traditional lenders are less familiar with. And so we think that the attached accessory dwelling will also be something that will be just much more attainable for homeowners that want to use their properties and build an ADU versus detached has been. All right, I'm going to go on to the next. Oh, any other? Is that it, Carl? You have one last question?
Nope, that was it. I just wanted to thank you for the answer.
Cool, thanks, Carl. Okay, Mike is next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my first question is, why is this being rushed through? The city council has postponed other major issues, such as the issue with the jail, with the safety training center. And I don't understand why this particular legislation is being rushed through. There's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts still unanswered. There's a lot of guarantees that are not in place. I don't understand why we are trying to pack everybody into the north side of the city when there are plenty of undeveloped spaces on the west side and on the south side of this city. I have been working with residents on affordable housing and trying to save their neighborhoods from developers. And what I see with this law is it becomes a free-for-all for developers. It is way too easy to get a variance to get around these rules. They don't do anything to protect our tree canopy or green spaces. So I just don't understand why this is being rushed through. We're currently tearing down affordable housing to build larger structures because it's so easy to get a variance. And this law seems to make it even easier. The other thing I don't understand is, how is it fair for the government to come in and change zoning laws in already established neighborhoods? I just looked at the map a couple of days ago of what is proposed for Ansley. I don't see how that is fair or equitable to come into an established single-family neighborhood because it's next to a MARTA station and allow people to come in and change the dynamic of that neighborhood to include.
Gwen, I think you should be listening to this.
So I just think that this needs to be postponed until after the election, when we have a new city council, a new mayor, and the citizens, residents, homeowners, and advocacy groups, particularly those who are concerned about our tree canopy, have an opportunity to address these issues in detail before the city council so that we have a more balanced new zoning law. Because I don't see the rush to do this. And the last comment is on parking. I've seen what's happened in Europe. I lived there for a number of years. When you take away parking requirements, it becomes a nightmare. The streets become clogged. Our mass transit system is 10, 15, 20 years away before becoming fully functional. There is no viable option for people to get around the city besides cars for the next 10 or 15 years. I think this is another case of putting the cart before the horse. So again, my basic question is, why are we rushing this? Why can't we allow more time for residents to have input before the new city council, since we have elections that are pending?
Thank you for your feedback, Mike. The only comment I'll make is that these ideas aren't new, and we've been doing public meetings for well over a year. And honestly, having conversations on this for 2, 3, 4. I mean, parking, for instance, was included in a 2019 action plan and reduction of parking minimum. So these aren't brand new ideas that came out on July 6th, but something that we've had long conversations about. And, we're sensitive that, that folks come along at different parts of the process and kind of get involved at different parts of that, and want to make as much space as we can to allow anyone that wants to be a part of these conversations to do so. That's part of why we pushed back our MPU vote an extra month to get additional feedback from residents that wanted to give it. And we're being really open to that feedback. We're already looking to include changes to the ordinances based on the feedback that's been provided. And so I appreciate everyone making time to come out today and to continue giving us feedback and letting us hear your thoughts on these ordinances. Paul Mcmurray is next. Hi, Paul, are you there?
I'm mute. Okay. This is Paul Mcmurray. You can hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah,
Thank
can
you.
you? Okay, so I want to answer the question. You did not answer when you were asked about the investor, absentee investor in this ADU and missing middle market. There is nothing zoning can do that can keep the investor owner out. Just like they can buy a single family house and rent it, they can put a duplex in a single family, a ADU on a single family and rent the whole thing. I would argue that your study that said there are 2,418 ADUs in neighborhoods that were at once R5 and are now R4. Is that correct? The question you should have asked, Josh, is why was the area downzone from R5 to R4? And I'll answer you the reason. It's because the absentee investor had more control under R5. I was an MPU chairman in 2000, and that's what MPUY did. I understand that's what MPU did. And many neighborhoods in Southwest and Southeast Atlanta took the R5 out of their MPUs because it was too much under the control of the absentee investor owner. And like most people who live on the South Side, we have never worried about not having an ADU. We have worried about absentee investors taking control of our communities. And the second question I have also is, why will not this ordinance be challenged in court? Why are you taking R1 through R3 out, which are basically the Buckhead neighborhoods? What you're doing is trying to separate potential political opposition. And it also breaks down racially and by income. As far as I know, you can't make a zoning ordinance which is based for political reasons and on income and race. Well, that's my comment. I ask everyone to be more critical. Okay, this is not Josh Humphreys is not the professor explaining things to you. You can be an advocate for the opposite position and state it forcefully, and please do so.
Thank you, Paul. A couple of notes I'll make, and then I'll move on to Jessica. One, accessory dwellings in the areas that we're proposing them and are already allowed. We're not proposing an expansion of accessory dwellings except for in the case of R4B, which is a small zoning district. The question at hand around absentee investors and ADUs is one that I'm not sure, I think that they're already allowed in those areas, and we're looking at ways in which to change how they're allowed and to give it more flexible and to make it more accessible for folks that would like to build accessory dwellings. We're not changing the area in which they would be allowed to be built in large part. Now, early on in this conversation, as many of you know, and Paul, I know you joined some of our early meetings, we were looking at potentially expanding ADUs to other parts of the city and allowing accessory dwellings in all the city's single family areas and the R1 to R3 neighborhoods in the city, which make up the most suburban areas and the largest lots. These are kind of minimum 1 acre lot, 2 acre lot type of areas of the city. These areas required, or really, after lots of community meetings, realized that, right now, as we're working through this, that this wasn't the right fit and we weren't going to move forward with it. But we didn't want that to stop us from making changes to ADUs in areas that we primarily already allow it to make them more accessible for folks. And so that's why this ordinance includes the R4 plus areas and ways to make it work better, but not R1 to R3.
I just like
all right,
to
Jessica.
add one point before you go. You are including attached ADUs, which is simply a backdoor way to put R5 into R4 for neighborhoods. I mean, that's my opinion, but what's new in this ordinance is going to allow attached ADUs. Is that not correct?
Yes, it would allow attached ADUs. I think there's a core difference between attached ADUs and R5, and that's that the secondary unit is size restricted, and that's very intentional in that we think it's important that we have smaller units in the city that can address different housing needs that different folks have and be more affordable by sake of their size. And so the attached ADUs, like the detached ADUs, will be size restricted. I'll also note that attached ADUs exist all over the country, and this is not something new to Atlanta and not something new to the rest of the country, but a way in which, allowing more flexibility for these smaller unit types as accessory types of dwellings in single family areas. This is quite a common practice throughout the country. Jessica, could you're up next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, Josh. So I have a pretty simple question. My fiance and I will be first-time home owners. We were looking to purchase a property in the city. In order for it to be affordable for us to actually own a home, we have to have a sort of a duplex, looks like a plan. The ADU is not exactly a duplex, and it wouldn't really be a group. It wouldn't really be a suitable option for what I imagine. So how is these new zonings going to help someone like me and my fiance? We're looking to purchase a single family home and then convert it into a duplex.
Sure. So one thing I'll note on ADUs, attached or detached, whatever the case might be, is that they are revenue producers. So I don't know the specific situation that you're looking for, but it is a revenue producing rental unit oftentimes for folks, and can be somewhere, kind of moderately priced that tends to be more affordable, but also does help, provide monthly revenue. So it could be a case where that could be good for you, and it would expand the options of the city where that might work. There is one zoning district in the city that does allow two-family dwellings, and a couple of historic districts that do as well. But the R5 zoning district, and if someone on the call from the team can drop the plan viewer link in the map. If not, Jessica, if you can just shoot me an email, I can send you a link that can show you where the zoning districts are in the city, and it could be something that you take a look at when you're looking for homes. But there is a zoning district in the city called R5 that does allow duplexes by right, if that's specifically what you're looking for.
The difference between an ADU and a duplex is what? The only other difference would be that you can't have a unique address. I did see that there were benefits that we can now have about double the size. It can be half the size of the home.
Sure. Yeah. So a traditional duplex, and kind of most folks think about the side-to-side duplex, right? That the units are equal size. So the main difference is that for an attached ADU, an attached ADU, it's a size restricted second unit that's attached to the main structure. A detached ADU is a separate house type structure that's in a backyard, and those are also size restricted. So the biggest limiter is that it's just smaller than what a traditional duplex that would be like the same size on both sides.
Okay, thank you. I'll email you, by the way, for additional info.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks. All right, Rachel.
Sure. I have actually probably 2 or 3 questions, but they're kind of connected.
Okay.
First is, I'm just kind of intrigued / a little concerned is that, so I work in real estate, so I actually have been seeing kind of the wild side of all of this as well. But, there's a lot of developers and builders who've bought single family lots, done the kind of modern version of the duplex where there's not technically zoned as a duplex, but they've gotten around it by calling it a townhouse, but effectively it is a duplex. These were all with the intent of supposedly going to be, very affordable housing under the 450 marker, and places like Reynoldstown, Cabbagetown, et cetera, they've been selling for 650 to 850. So supremely not your missing middle housing at all.
Sure.
So I guess out of, some of these ordinances, my concern and question is, how are you guys looking to limit developers and builders, truly limit them, not just kind of like, oh, we have this, piece about the rental? Because I've seen time and time again, a lot of developers kind of get out of that in a lot of ways, or they put pressure, it's a market pressure, they can sell higher, et cetera. Because it feels like it keeps getting pushed to your everyday resident. So that's question one.
Sure. Well, let's break them up then real quick, if that is, just so I don't lose track of them, if that works for you.
Yeah, that's
right.
right.
I'll answer the first one first. Okay. So I think there are a couple thoughts I have on that. One, there is a kind of a market housing supply issue that's putting the most immense amount of pressure, kind of broad pressure on the market, and creating more housing supply will ease a good bit of that pressure. So that's one element of it. That takes time, and that takes kind of a lot of housing supply to come online, but we think that this would help with that. To your broader question on the kind of the mega duplex, if you would, concerns, I think that it's also a concern for us, and to a point I made earlier, I think it was maybe answer to Mr. Mcmurray's question. That's part of why we look to size restrict. So we didn't propose R5 everywhere. We didn't propose 2-family dwellings everywhere, but looking at attached ADUs versus doing that, we're hopeful that will help as far as the types of units that are coming online.
So
because in large part, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask with the near transit ones though, where it's 1 to 4 units. I guess that's where I see the potential for this same issue to come up in multiple other areas.
Sure. Yeah. So on that one, yeah. So right now it would allow 1 to 4 with no affordability requirements, and versus most of those areas are either R5 or R4. So either 2-family dwellings or a single family and an ADU is what's allowed in all of those. So it would be a slight increase before the density bonus would kick in. That is correct.
Okay.
It's something that we are getting feedback in, if there, desire that the affordability move down even below 4 units. It's something that we're happy to take under consideration. But above that, there would be affordability requirements and annual compliance, and that would be required for the 20-year period for a certain number of units.
Okay, because I definitely, I think a couple of people are probably mentioning this in the chat as well, but I think that the no affordability requirement has the potential just for a lot of pitfalls, and some of that same issue happening kind of exacerbated in other areas too that didn't previously have it. But my second question is in terms of—
One question on that, just if I can jump on it real quick, because I see someone else mentioned in the chat around townhouses. MRMU, and I should have included this in the presentation, MRMU explicitly does not allow townhouses as a development pattern. So 0 lot line, single family townhouse structures, which is allowed, is how most of the townhouses exist in the city, that is prohibited under MRMU. So that would not be an outcome of this. That's something that we're explicitly not allowing. So you would not see 4 luxury townhouses built under this.
Okay, well, that actually leads into my next question. That's perfect, because my other part of it is I work in a lot of, I have a background in historic preservation, so I've worked a lot with historic districts, historic properties, but also being from Atlanta, I'm really familiar with a lot of these variety of neighborhoods. So I look at a place like, I'll use Reynoldstown again, or Peachtree Hills and Buckhead, or if you want to hop over to the West End, and I'm seeing these older houses that had pretty significant setback lines get knocked down, you get a variance, and you're getting these gigantic houses popped in with, money's paid, whatever, how it's happening, but variances are going through. So even though things aren't allowed technically, they're still happening, not just a little bit, but pretty rampantly throughout the city in all sorts of these neighborhoods. So I guess the other concern is, I think it's great to find ways to get more people in affordable housing, but there's a lot of concerns of truly, like, how well do we think these are going to be enforced, or enforceable, I should say.
Sure. One thing on the kind of to the large houses, there are we're seeing modest homes torn down for large houses across the city right now, in ways that something more modest, more affordable is not happening, is torn down for something much more unaffordable. And so we're aware of that. And I mean, I think as we start ramping up conversations around the zoning rewrite and ways to address that and asking about kind of appropriate size of house, it's something, I know that's not the core of your question, but something that you brought up. And I think we also think is important. To the question of enforceability and compliance, any affordability requirement is only as good as the compliance requirements that surround it and the teeth. And so the way this one is built really builds on the work we've done the last 3 or 4 years around inclusionary zoning. So our office manages the inclusionary zoning program, which requires affordable housing around the Beltline and a few other areas of the city. And so that's managed through land use covenants that have to be executed by the city. So that's what will be required here, is that in order to take advantage of the density bonus and to get your CEO, you'd have to enter into a land use covenant on the front end. And then annual compliance requirements would be in place, so that if it's a rental situation, you have to do your rent rolls. If it's for sale, at the time of sale, there would be restrictions on stuff to ensure that there's affordability over the life of the 20-year period. And that compliance mechanism exists in our office already and is capable of expanding from a capacity standpoint to take on this as well. And there are, this is not the only affordability density bonus we have in the city. Midtown SPI, for instance, has an affordability density bonus for larger apartment buildings. So the mechanisms are in place already for us to do it. This would just be a new way in which affordability would be done. But I have confidence that we'll be able to enforce compliance for affordability for the period. Okay, so that was your second question. I'll give you one last one and then we'll move on to Leanne.
Well, my last question is actually more about the ADU factor. Obviously, the
Okay.
Airbnb and short-term versus long-term rentals has been a huge discussion statewide, not just citywide. But in terms of that, is there a way to, maybe not encourage is the right word, but is there a way to find a path forward so that it's not an Airbnb option, that it truly is more of that rental, what it's intended for? What you look at these older neighborhoods and how they originally were built, you did have the CEO living next to the janitor sometimes, in terms of just how the communities were laid out. So getting that long-term resident versus a short-term visitor.
Yeah, it's something we're interested in as well. The short-term rental conversation, as many of you may know, the city passed a short-term rental ordinance a couple of, I guess it was a few months ago now. But the current ordinance does not impact the zoning code. And so as we look at this, and I think in the future, look at, the zoning implications of short-term rental and how we best handle that. ADUs is absolutely the top of my list and on our list as a department on, what's the best way to handle that and balance out flexibility for homeowners who are trying to kind of use their properties as in person, I think it was Jessica mentioned kind of how to, afford a property in the city, but also at the end goal, create affordability and long-term housing options throughout the city. So it's something that we have a goal in and are working through as we continue to have conversations about how to best address short-term rentals in the zoning code. Okay, I guess Leanne is next.
Hey, actually, Rachel touched on a lot of the questions that I had, like how the affordability component would be kept accountable. But I just wanted to sort of come back to her point around the in MRMU, the 1 to 4 units and the lack of having an affordability component in there. I definitely have some concerns about that. I am definitely in support of that we need more housing through the city and that there's logic about developing that around our MARTA lines. But my concern is that, when you get over 2 units, there are additional factors. Obviously, without the zoning change, nothing can be done without getting variances. But there's other factors. When you get over 2 units, then you have requirements for sprinklers. When you get to 4 units, you have fair housing, accessibility requirements. And so these are things that will drive up the cost of construction, which will then drive up the cost of those units. So if there's ways to put additional protections so that it truly does meet those goals of affordability, because I understand that we need more housing period across the city, but if we're going to target areas around transit, those really should be prioritized from an affordability standpoint. Because there's just so much data around the cost of transportation and the car ownership among lower income, and that really would, I think, be impactful. The other aspect I wanted to touch on was, is there any way to provide any sort of incentive from a historic preservation standpoint? I'm in Ponce Highland, and we have a historic district that part of the rationale was about protecting some of our existing affordable housing, or naturally occurring affordable housing. I would love to be able to see some of these older structures increased in the number of units, converted into duplexes or quads. But is there some way to balance retaining our historical structures while also increasing density?
Sure. That's something that we've talked about as well, ways to kind of incentivize retaining structures. There are a lot of places in the city where I was on a call with someone earlier today talking about this, old houses in Inman Park that were converted into 4, 5, 6 units. This the original structure is just the internal conversion. So it's something that we also want to incentivize and think could be a positive development. So we're looking into that. So I'll take that feedback and as well as the questions around affordability above 2 units is what I'm hearing from you and a few others. So take both of those back. I appreciate your feedback on that. One quick note. Oh, go ahead.
And because you've mentioned that you all are already in discussion about some, I guess, amendments or updates on this. Will that come through the neighborhoods and the NPUs in advance of the NPU vote in October for consideration?
Yeah, we are aiming to beginning of September send that updated version out, so the NPUs have a full month with it before it would go in October.
Excellent, thank you.
The one thing I'll note before I go back to the next hand raise is around the tree protection ordinance and ADUs. The ADUs, the detached ADUs are already allowed in the majority of the areas, and what we're actually proposing, there was a concern in the chat that it would be would potentially harm the tree canopy. It's something that, the tree canopy is obviously something we are sensitive about and care ways how to protect that in the single family districts of the city. And so the allowing attached ADUs would actually do a lot to protect the tree canopy, we believe, by allowing more flexibility and allowing the structure to be, or the dwelling to be attached to the main structure versus being a detached ADU in the backyard. And so that we think that these flexibilities, and even the flexibility go a little bit higher, can allow the structure to be narrower and just generally more flexible so that it can preserve more trees on the lot than ADU ordinance currently does in these areas. Okay, I'll go back to the next hand raise. Looks like I see Paul's hand as well.
This is Paul Mcmurray again. I'm sorry, I didn't see anyone else's hand raised, so I decided to raise mine again. So I don't want to take away from anyone else. But I think one thing that you're not pointing out with proactive zoning is that when you proactively rezone, you likely take away the community review that goes on when a project is proposed. If a person wants to get one of those lots around a MARTA station that may be not zoned MU, if they have to go through the zoning process, then the community gets to look at their site plan and gets to review it. It's possible that they could still get to review a site plan even under proactive, but it's not necessarily so. So what happens is the community has less review over new developments that require a rezoning because it was already done. And, that's just the point I like to make on that.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Everyone, I just want to give a heads up. We're almost at 7:30, and I want to try and get everyone out in a reasonable time. So I'll take Mike's hand raised. If anyone has any last, I've tried to keep up with the chat, but it's moving fast. So if there's something in the chat, otherwise that you want to real quick ask. Okay, so Mike, if you don't mind, actually, both Tom and Regina haven't had a chance to talk yet. I'm going to do them, and then I'll come back to you if we still have time. So Tom, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, just a quick question. Hi, Josh. I'm actually legitimately trying to understand what these ordinances mean. And so if I have a friend who's a developer and maybe she is looking at a property in Ansley and it's within a half mile of the Art Center MARTA station, and say it's on here, it's right there on Peachtree Circle. And so if they buy a house and knock it down, how many units could they possibly put on a half-acre lot in Ansley?
Sure. So there are a couple things. One, right now, one of the things that we're working on changes is the minimum lot size for MRMU. It's currently a 2,000 square foot minimum lot size, which is comparable to other smaller apartment requirements, but we don't think matches super well with the single family, two family areas. So we're looking to increase the minimum lot size. And the reason I bring that up is that does play a role here because the way that the MRMU works, there's a maximum of 12 units per lot that would be in place. So to take kind of a traditional single family type lot.
Assume it's like a half an acre. I can't translate acres into feet. I'm not that smart.
Yeah, I don't know that I can on the fly either. So maybe we'll have to talk through offline. Like if you'll send me a note, we can talk through the logistics of that. But or maybe we can even take an example lot and kind of talk through what that would be. But a 50 by 150 type lot is kind of the general one I'm thinking of. I don't know if the ones in Ansley that you're talking about would fit that, but that type of lot that's probably 7,000-ish, 8,000 square feet. And I think 50 by 150 is 7,500, if I'm correct on that. Sorry if I bastardized that. I normally don't do quick math in front of people, but I think that's about right.
So this says hey Josh, this says a half an acre is 21,800 square feet. So on a half acre lot, which is good size, right? They're not all that large.
Sure.
But a good size lot in Ansley, I'm using that as an example because there was a house that was knocked down recently. And I'm just wondering, could you put a 12 unit apartment building where what used to be a single family residence used to be?
The short answer is yes. That proposal would be allowed in this.
And so is that a new? So in other words, like that's a new thing from this ordinance that you'd be able to do.
In certain areas of the city. So so that would be like in the areas in proximity to the MARTA stations, half-mile walking distance from MARTA station is where that proposal would be. That would allow that. And then it would also, we're looking at, like I mentioned, some of the compatibility stuff that we're working on because we want to ensure that, if that scenario were to happen, that there are design controls that ensure that the structure itself would fit neighborhood setbacks and other types of character as that grows. But yeah, that's the general sense of it, is that certain areas would be rezoned that would allow smaller apartments alongside single family housing and two family housing and the like.
So just so I understand, if there are 30 lots in Ansley they're within a half mile, you could actually knock them all down and put up 12 unit apartments on every one of those lots. If you were an enterprising developer, let's just say.
Sure, I think that possibility is there. One thing that you could ostensibly build that. I think that the question for me, and I'll keep coming back from, is we are in areas of the city and in other places around the country that have allowed these small apartment buildings are not very easy to build, right? I know that we've seen a real rise in townhouses in the city, but folks that have been trying to build these smaller MRMUs in areas that and get them rezoned, but they're not that easy to build. And so I think that the profit margins and the ability to build them, there's a lot of questions about kind of how many of these are we going to get, and there's value propositions in different neighborhoods. And in a neighborhood like Ansley Park, that you have very valuable single family homes, and I think the prospect of a very valuable single family home being leveled for a large apartment building is one that I don't know that we're going to see that many of. I think there's going to be a mixed between what we see and what we don't. Maybe we see a few, maybe there's a few lots that get developed or otherwise, but I don't think that this is like a situation, and we don't expect it to be, where there's this universal tear down of lots. And also people own their lots and want to keep their lots. We're not forcing anyone to sell anything.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, Regina.
Hi. My first question is there a way that we can get a copy of the Zoom call?
If Paula is on the call and can answer that.
Yes, this Zoom call is being recorded.
And how do we, the citizens, get a copy of it?
So if you would like a copy, please email dcpcommunications@atlantagA.gov and I'll send you the link.
Thank you. Could you please put that in the chat?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Is there also a way to get a copy of the chat?
We have that saved as well.
Okay. And next, I would just like to say that I agree entirely with Mike Russell. And my question is, why can't this be held off until after the election? Why is this such a priority and so urgent now?
Sure. I think one of the things that I mentioned is that this is not something, this is not really a new idea or something that, we just happened upon. It's something that we've been working on for a long time and have been having meetings about for a long time. And are, obviously in the middle of having kind of feedback sessions on this right now. As far as the timing of it and why we're continuing to work on it, I think that there's kind of a fundamental question that we're working through as a city. And I saw some comments about growth and desire to wait to grow until we figure everything out. And I think that in some sense misses the order of operations of what we're dealing with and why we're having this conversation. That we didn't choose to grow as a city in many ways, but we're reacting to the growth of the city. That in the last decade, we've added, tens of thousands of new residents for the first time in 50 years. And there are a lot of challenges with that growth. And one of the challenges we're facing is that we have a zoning code that was built during a period of population decline, and we've not accommodated and changed our zoning code to accommodate being a city that's growing rapidly. And that's something that we can't wait on. And for anyone that's paying attention to the housing market right now, I think you'd know that how much of a housing supply shortage, how quickly the cost of housing is going up in Atlanta, and how desperate our need is to address this as quickly as we can for our future, to have an affordable future, an accessible one, and to adapt as quickly as possible to the changing needs of the city. And one of those needs is that we need more housing, and we need it in ways that fit Atlanta and that are subtle and respond to the needs of the city. And that's why now, and that's why we're working on these specific proposals and working with you and listening to ways that we can improve them. But we have to figure out as a city how to change and respond to the growth that we're seeing. So that's the answer as to why now and why even these general ideas to begin with. I will. We're a bit over time. Mike, you've had your hand raised for a while.
I'm sorry, we're out of time, and thank you for cutting me off. But what you are saying makes no sense at all. First of all, if it has waited this long, another few months aren't going to matter. Our infrastructure cannot handle the residents we have now. Our roads, our sewers are crumbling. We have countless amounts of apartments being built. I could go on and on, but we are out of time. And Josh, you may be on a deadline. I don't know. I don't know how long you've been a resident of Atlanta or what your interest is in this, but it's clearly an issue all for the developers. So thank you for your presentation.
Thanks for your feedback, Regina. Okay, Mike, I'll give you the last word and then we'll wrap up.
Well, some of it was covered earlier by Tom, but again, I just think this is being rushed. A lot of folks have just been made aware of this recently. Folks are very upset because they think this is sort of being pushed along without their input. And I don't understand a lot of it, including the building of apartment farms around MARTA, because that does nothing when our MARTA system will not be able to handle viable traffic for another 10 or 15 years. I really think we need to back up, look at building purpose-built communities similar to what they do in Europe, where people don't have to travel away from where they live to work and play and recreate. And I don't think it's fair to come in and change the rules on already established communities, whether or not they're next to a MARTA station. And the third thing is, I don't understand why we try to keep packing people into the north side of the city, and we cannot use these resources to develop the underdeveloped parts of our city that are showing blight and everything else, and build affordable housing where land is still affordable rather than in places like Ansley or Buckhead. I don't mean to criticize you personally, but I don't know whose plan this is, but for me, it doesn't pass the common sense test. And I would urge everybody to go to the city website, look, you can place in who is my NPU, contact your NPU, contact your city rep, and let your voice be heard. Because once we lose the uniqueness of our city, it's gone forever. And we need to stand up against this, just like folks stood up to save the Fox Theater, just like folks stopped that expressway that was going to go through Virginia Highlands and Emmons Park. This is the last chance for us to save our canopy, our green spaces, and our single family homes. So I would urge everybody, whether you agree with me or not, call your NPU, call your city rep, and let your voice be heard before it's too late. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And to end on really on that note, we are, as I mentioned, we are going to NPUs throughout the city. We're wrapping up our August NPUs, and we'll be going back in September with some updates to these ordinances. And I encourage you to go get involved in your NPUs and be involved in this conversation. And I know that it's been a long time since my chat dropped in here, so I will I'll put my email address in here one more time. So feel free to shoot me an email if you got any questions or if there's anything I can help with. And I hope you all have a great night. Thanks for spending your evening talking with us, and we'll be in touch soon. Appreciate the feedback. Bye, everyone.